The commissioners have ties to the very parties they are investigating, like the CIA, banking, and financial interests, and Bush administration officials. For example, Philip Zelikow wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice. Zelikow was also one of the primary authors of NSS 2002. Vice Chairman Lee Hamilton said, quote, "We're not interested in trying to assess blame. We do not consider that a part of the Commission's responsibility." Dr. David Ray Griffin, author of The New Pearl Harbor and Christian Faith and the Truth Behind 9/11, mentions the revisionism and fallacies of the report in his book, The 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions.
Most of the steel beams and columns came down in sections about 30 feet long, conveniently ready to be loaded onto trucks. These columns were the unique feature of these towers when they were first built. Well, what did the 9/11 Commission report do about that problem? It avoided the problem incredibly by simply denying the existence of these columns, even though those columns, I'm not making this up. So, the Commission report, after saying falsely that most of the weight of each tower was borne by the steel columns in its exterior walls, this supposedly authoritative report said the interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft in which elevators and stairwells were grouped. Such a desperate lie is a sure sign of a cover-up. In any case, when we look at all these features of the collapses, the idea that they could have been caused by the impact of the airplanes plus the resulting fires is ridiculous. This is even clearer with regard to building number 7, which wasn't hit by any airplane, and yet it came down about 5:30 that afternoon. Its collapse remains so impossible to explain, except as controlled demolition, that the 9/11 Commission report did not even mention it, as if the collapse of a 47-story building was not worthy of comment.
The 9/11 Commission, which people think that was very thorough, in their report, they don't even mention the collapse of Building 7. In any case, we need an investigation that will give us answers about Building 7. NIST is still not giving us an answer. FEMA says our best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. Well, we want an investigative team that will look at the possibility of explosives.
One feature of the attacks that suggests complicity by U.S. officials is the twofold fact that the U.S. military failed to stop the attacks on 9/11, and that then, since then, they have given us 3 different stories as to why they failed. These changing stories suggest that the military has been trying to cover up the fact that a stand-down order was given on 9/11, canceling the military's own standard operating procedures for dealing with hijacked airplanes. It is certainly clear that some agency, either the military or the FAA, failed to follow standard procedures on 9/11. If you've read the story in Popular Mechanics, you know, one of their big lies is, oh, gee, there's only been one such interception in the last several years. No, it's a routine procedure, about 100 times a year. On 9/11, however, it did not happen. Why not? The military's first story was that no planes were sent up until after the Pentagon was hit. The military leaders were admitting, therefore, that they had left their fighters on the ground for almost 90 minutes after the FAA had first noticed signs of a possible hijacking. This first story suggested to many people that a stand-down order must have been given. By the end of the week, the military had put out a second story, saying that it had sent up fighters, but that because the FAA had been very late in notifying it about the hijackings, the fighters arrived too late. in each case. One problem with this story is if the FAA personnel had responded so slowly, heads should have rolled, but none did. An even more serious problem is that even assuming the truth of the late notification times, the military's fighters still had time to intercept the hijacked airliners before they were to hit their targets. The second story implied, therefore, that standard procedures had been violated by the military as well as by the FAA. To try to defend the military against this accusation, the 9/11 Commission report gave us a third story, according to which the FAA, after giving the military insufficient warning about the first hijacked airline, gave it absolutely no warning about the other three until after they had crashed. But as I have pointed out in my second book on 9/11, this account is wholly implausible. Besides portraying the FAA personnel from top to bottom as incompetent, bumbling dolts, the 9/11 Commission's account rests on claims that contradict many credible and mutually supporting testimonies. In some of these cases, the fact that the Commission is simply lying is obvious. In addition, this third story implies that the military's second story, which it had been telling for almost 3 years, was almost entirely false. So if our military leaders were lying to us all that time, why should we believe them now? And if our military is lying to us, must we not assume that it is doing so to cover up its own guilt? In sum, the behavior of the military, both on 9/11 and afterwards, combined with the fact that the 9/11 Commission had to resort to lies to make the U.S. military appear blameless, suggests that U.S. military leaders were complicit in the attacks.
I do not feel it was even correct. I feel it was lies.
It did not address reports of alleged hijackers being still alive today.
You backtrack every one of those that were on that panel. They were friends of the upper in Washington. They all had jobs or previous jobs or still have jobs connected with somebody in the government. No, that's conflict of interest.
Terry Brunner is a former federal prosecutor who now runs the Aviation Integrity Project in Chicago. Brunner checked out the commissioners and found out 6 out of 10 represent the very companies being investigated. He says they are, quote, Fred Fielding, Spirit Airlines and United Airlines. Slade Gordon represents Delta Airlines. Jim Thompson represents American Airlines. Richard Benveniste represents Boeing and United Airlines, and Representative Tom Romer, Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Richard Benveniste not only represents Boeing and United, but he also has other connections that destroy any credibility the investigation has left. In 2001, Daniel Hopsicker wrote a book called Barry and the Boys. It has an entire chapter entitled, Who is Richard Benveniste? Hopsicker says the lawyer Benveniste, quote, has made a career of defending political crooks, specializing in cases that involve drugs and politics. Benveniste represented Barry Seal, one of the most famous drug dealers in U.S. history, who also has alleged links to the CIA. He is referred to by some as a mob lawyer. In addition, Commissioner Lee Hamilton sits on several advisory boards, including those to the U.S. Army, the President's Homeland Security Advisory Council, and the CIA. Thomas Keane, the Republican chair on the 9/11 Commission, cut a deal preventing Bush from testifying and allowing the White House to edit intelligence briefings before the commissioners could see them. Senator Max Cleland resigned over the Commission's numerous conditions with the White House. In his own words, quote, "That decision compromised the mission of the 9/11 Commission, period."
You know, we should have had people, you know, on a panel that had no ties with our government officials. It is wrong. It is corrupt. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, anybody that sees this interview, they better open their eyes, because this is real. This is the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life.